Hey y'all, Elijah here. It is like 4 a.m. and I've been preparing for this video for like almost a year now. It is going to be a doozy. I cannot ask the question of the video's namesake in good faith without asking what were they looking to achieve? And actually, that's a good question. Most of the crowd didn't prepare prior and just kind of did what they did in the moment. I would say the closest thing to a motive the crowd most collectively had was to stop the approval of the election, a thing that kind of united them all. However, there were a few people that did prepare. They, and more of them, could have prepared more. Y'all remember Donald Trump's famous Be There, Be Well tweet? It was sent out on the December 19th, 2020, and the Capitol riot happened on, well, you know when. That is roughly 2.5 weeks to get ready. And it just so happens to be over a holiday. That doesn't initially seem important, but it kind of is. As we remember, 6 people died on January 6th. Out of like the 2,000 people that were said to have been attending, that's pretty good. But it could have been so much deadlier. Things that could have been done by the Trumpists to prepare more for their protest include getting a hold of weapons. This is America, so you already know. Guns galore. But that's conventional. Stuff too, even, such as tasers, pepper spray, facial protection. Explosives were found near the Capitol, but none able to cause damage. Things like grenades would be fairly conventional too, although illegal to get your hands on. So I think the Trumpists would be thinking a little more outside the box in this timeline, where they actually succeeded. And to be fair, some did think out of the box. Eric Munchell, that guy brought zip ties. But I mean like bigger things. First year perhaps? New Year's had passed recently. They would have been within reason to have obtained fireworks. Of course, explosives like those can't be very precise, but these people ignore science anyways. They wouldn't have cared. So we've established the use of more guns and fireworks. How much more differently would this have turned out? Well, the moment the first shot rings out, bullets go flying. Very quickly they would overtake the police up the Capitol steps, and several windows would be entered into by more forceful people with guns and plenty of ammo. The police would be shooting too, but by sheer numbers they'd be overwhelmed. As we know, the National Guard would have taken a while to arrive. By the time the rotunda holding the Senate, but even more importantly than that, Vice President Mike Pence, and not just him, the Secret Service, with the country's nuclear launch codes. Don't worry, this alone couldn't let them launch nukes, as several people are required to launch the nukes of the country. But it's still important, plus Pence. Remember, the reason Mike Pence is important is that during the Capitol riot, Trump also tweeted to complain about Mike Pence not wanting to overthrow the election. Yeah, hang Mike Pence, they began chanting. They even constructed a gallows. The Senate and House had begun to have been evacuated by then, but easily the mob would meet Mike Pence ahead of the Senate in this timeline. They probably wouldn't try to steal him to hang him, but just kill him on the spot. After an intense battle, likely even detonating a firework, the Secret Service and Vice President Mike Pence would be dead. The mob would have the nuclear launch codes. Then comes the House. Protester Ashley Babbitt would have breached a broken window, almost certainly getting shot along with anyone else who tries. So it's not like they can realistically shoot every single one of the police and lawmakers, let alone have the time to hang any one of them. So to bypass the human wall of police protecting the lawmakers, the Trumpists would probably launch fireworks in their direction. The whoosh of the firework is heard. And then the bombs burst in air above the mass of lawmakers. Several would die from this. I would estimate a couple hundred die. Around 80 police, 40 lawmakers, 300 Trumpists, and a couple of others. Some bodies never being able to be identified, with others being severely injured or losing body parts. The police would be dead. Many Trumpists, but not all of them, would be dead. Most importantly, the vote would be stopped. The government would be in disarray. At this point, the National Guard would need to get involved. They would rush on DC, and the surviving Trumpists would need to leave as quickly as possible. But distracted, they wouldn't. They would make their own attempt to seal off the Capitol and generally empty the building of people they hate. Now, what would Trump be doing? Trump may be surprised, scared even. He would even be in a mess. But this would be his only opportunity to take control, surely before his situation devolves. Trump would announce a national emergency and, by extension, martial law. Many would see this as the right thing to do, disgusted by the Capitol slaughter. Others would see it as authoritarian. But the majority of Trumpists, they then at that point would take that as a signal that democracy is no longer active. Remember, even today in our timeline, there are millions of people, like I think 1/3 of the country, who believes that the Capitol attack was not only justified but necessary. Despite a far deadlier attack, I'm sure many would continue to believe in the necessity of the attack, and might even join in on any further action. Further attacks would be carried out nationwide, not just on government buildings, but on civilian populations. Surely Trumpists would be emboldened to do things like kill LGBT or minority people. Basically, imagine Kyle Rittenhouse times 1,000. The federal government would be busy sorting itself, so local governments would take attempts to sort themselves, getting power on their own. I'm thinking there could be attacks on government buildings in California, New York, Illinois, even the red or purple states like Texas or Florida. They would try to seize control of governments. These extremists would make an attempt to enforce their own laws. Things conservatives like, like no taxes, taking away the rights of LGBT people, women, atheists, Muslims. By sunset, the situation in DC would be addressed. You remember the death count? That was just pre-National Guard. Post-National Guard, perhaps 900 more Trumpists might be dead. Even more fireworks might be detonated inside the Capitol. The Capitol would surely be damaged, and the main government of the United States would be run from the White House. I'm not personally convinced any of the Secret Service would switch sides and dare attempt to assassinate the president. He himself had done nothing, but he encouraged his minions to go do his dirty work for him. Then the date is January the 7th, 2021. The sun rises in Honolulu. America is a mess. A few thousand have died all over the country from attacks. The California Capitol would even have been seized, I think. But these attacks aren't all that's happening. In fact, they're still in the minority by far. For most communities, it's just militias forming. Trumpist militias would form to protect towns, as well as more progressive, liberal, maybe socialist militias in communities like Atlanta, Georgia. Thinking about it, Atlanta would need the most protection. There'd be a lot of hate towards the city of Atlanta. Why? Well, because Atlanta is what gave Georgia to the Democrats. That's all any big city ever does in America. So conservatives would let out their anger by attacking big cities. I gotta clarify, Atlanta was so effective in turning Georgia blue due to its black population. So that would be where most anger is focused. And the tension in this rope is about to snap. A convoy of a few dozen neo-Nazis from nationwide would descend on Atlanta, opening fire on the black population in black neighborhoods. Many wouldn't have weapons to defend themselves with, so like that, many would be killed. Even the local police might not be that effective. Unfortunately for them, police officers from many other parts of the country may join the attack. A total of 600 people would die on this unprecedented attack on Atlanta, but a smaller attack would gain an equal amount of attention for its tragic nature. A neo-Nazi said 14 famous words among modern white supremacists and neo-Nazis. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So, as you can tell, the neo-Nazis really love their children. A few neo-Nazis would want to strike at the youth, the black youth of Atlanta. Let's say North Side High School in Atlanta. No idea if that's real or not, but I'm not going to bother. I was originally planning on choosing a high school from Atlanta, but I'd rather not do something like that. I also kind of don't want this video to get taken down. It's already very risky. If I'm going to write about people dying, it's going to be about fictional people dying as much as I can. So just pretend it's a real school with like a 90% black population. Anyway, 8 neo-Nazis would head into Northside High School in Atlanta. There, they would carry out their massacre, managing to kill about 67 students before they were all subdued. With that many killed, going so far as to more than double the amount of people killed in the Virginia Tech shooting, the Northside High School massacre becomes the new worst school shooting in America. And not only one that was racially motivated, but politically motivated. 67 kids dead over politics. It wouldn't be the last of major attacks on U.S. cities. San Francisco most likely would have its civilians attacked, but I won't even mention that. I need to make room for another more important incident. If you've been paying attention, an ideology that the Trumpists hate is globalism, especially agencies such as the United Nations. There are popular conspiracy theories stating online that the United Nations is the biblical Antichrist. Trumpists claim to, anyways, love Christ. The UN actually recognizes science. They don't. So it's only logical that they dislike the UN. And one of them would take that dislike into hate, and hate into action. A South Carolina pilot from Ridgeville, South Carolina, named Oscar Benjamin Larson, guess where I got those initials from, happens to be an ardent supporter of Trump and happens to hate the UN. American airports are shutting down in reaction to the unrest throughout the U.S., but they are not empty. They still have things to do. There are people trying to leave the country to avoid violence, but remember, this is during COVID, so not many countries are actually going to have their borders open, especially not to us. Most flights will be domestic, to get closer to family, since road travel just might have you travel through violent zones. You might even get robbed on the road without the federal government really working. Imagine a purge, but without the legalized crime part, which surprisingly, that does not defang it entirely. Anyway, back on topic. Captain Larson here loves Jesus Christ and hates the Antichrist, the UN. Today, he has a flight from Charleston to Albany. This route will allow him to pass New York City. Of course, every pilot knows about 9/11 to some extent. To the vast majority, it's a nightmare scenario which they would never want to see happen to them, especially not on their planes. But Captain Larson is about to pervert the concept of 9/11 into something patriotic. Surely, a man doing something so big isn't committing a crime of passion. This was definitely premeditated. Although he had not had the confidence before to carry such a thing out, there's just not so much that can be done to assure rogue pilots don't crash their planes. Other than, like, 2 pilots being in the cockpit at all times. The captain and first officer. Today, he's a captain doing the flying. His plan was to really just wait for the first officer to take a piss. He takes a piss on his own just to make himself more comfortable before he dies. He posts a tweet about the UN's uselessness, which itself doesn't signal anything. Lucky for him, when he returns from the restroom, the first officer needs to go to the restroom as well. As the first officer goes into the restroom, Larson locks the doors of the cockpit and takes control. At this point, the plane would be west of JFK International Airport, roughly southeast of the UNHQ. This would give Larson a good amount of room to turn west in the direction of the Manhattan neighborhood and crash the plane. However, as I said, he's done his research. He is not planning to crash the plane into the tower. Rather, he's aiming for the General Assembly building. That's the part of the building that the average person more often sees in media, where the representatives of nations gather. But plans don't always work out how you want them to. See, when I said the pilot locked the cockpit, I kinda lied. You can only ever manage to actually lock the cockpit for about 30 seconds with one pilot in the cockpit. That's why Larson waited until the last minute to take control. I'm sure that once the flight attendants understood the situation, they might trigger the emergency access system. The first officer would leave the bathroom and re-enter the cockpit to see the captain flying the plane, presumably into the assembly building. From the direction of the East River, that's difficult to aim for. With the first officer sneaking up on the captain from behind, the captain loses their precision path and instead steers left, crashing into the UN Secretariat building at a 30-degree angle relative to the building's wall by the edge. That should be enough that the plane debris actually goes through the building and falls onto the General Assembly building, plus the street below. Similarly to 9/11, the building would collapse. However, that's an even more significant building than the World Trade Center. Many worldwide would be shocked, disgusted, perhaps even horrified. The world's attention would be set on America. But there will always be that American minority, especially of Trumpists, which would cheer as the Secretariat building of the UN collapses. Oh no, this is going to be incredibly offensive. But basically, to shorten this, imagine it like this.
I hate the Antichrist! I hate
the... Yeah. There will be an investigation into the incident, but it won't amount to much, as there's no living person to punish. The spirits of nationalists will be emboldened. Meanwhile, in the White House, Donald Trump would enjoy his martial law. Clear bias is shown. Trump emboldened state governors to do what they like if remaining loyal. Only the Republicans, of course. The blue states, those would come under a more strict control from D.C. With President Pence and the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, dead, the new vice president would be President pro tempore of the Senate, or Charles Ernest Grassley. Although there's a bit of a problem. Grassley is older than Trump, and by about 13 years more as well. Trump himself is a bag. Alexa, stop. So the position of vice president is contested. Who contests it? Well, next in the line of succession is Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. As a younger Trump loyalist, this is who Trump wants. He'd probably work with a few shady people to clean up Grassley. Boom. Now Mike Pompeo is vice president. The USA is in an even worse situation than before, as Trump's network is a little tighter. So there's not too much President-elect Biden can do right now. Not with Trump still legally holding power. Slowly but surely so, the military are deployed to American streets to quell any violence. And by American streets, I just mean blue streets. And not just because all the big cities are blue. Red cities like Fort Worth kind of just get left alone. Some soldiers don't quite like Trump anymore, seeing how he's threatening American democracy. So there will be a few soldiers who quit. You know, the more freedom-loving ones. Leaving the U.S. military even more to white nationalists, which, by the way, it is back that a great deal of cops and soldiers are part of white supremacist groups. Retired General Paul Eden made a statement saying that such a scenario of a U.S. coup backed by the military is low probability, high impact. Attempts will be made to embolden the military, but only so much can be done. A little under 2 weeks passes. Now it is the 20th of January, around the time Biden should have been inaugurated. However, as you would assume, Trump refuses to concede, and his supporters will occupy D.C. in his defense. Remember, the even further absurdity of this is that the population of DC is incredibly progressive, with nearly 80% of the population voting Democratic. Similar to the status quo, they do not have their own state, but rather are subject entirely to the decision of the federal government, which right now is just Trump. Basically, a king ruling over a city that hates him, with the only supporters being from out of town. In fact, it's only through violence that DC has been so quiet. With DC having a 45% black population, several have been killed by far-right groups occupying the area. And it is still just dangerous for them to exist in the DC area. The world has spent most of January looking at the United States as a man pouring napalm on himself. America's allies especially are deeply concerned, and the enemies stare on looking for opportunities. Russia, I imagine, would take the risk and decide to just straight up invade Ukraine. Everything east of the Dnieper River, except for the northern border. For that one, they invade up to the Pripyat River, more towards Belarus. Europe protests, but without the strongest ally, they're too weak and scared to really do anything. Except for, I imagine, some Poles. They have balls of steel considering their history with Russia. Poland sends an expeditionary force to help Ukraine, but once Russia discovers this, they threaten Poland with nuclear bombing. And while Poland is a member of NATO, the other NATO members with nuclear bombs, like the UK and France, just have way less. They would probably not be willing to risk nuclear bombing in defense of Poland. I mean, especially not considering Poland is hardly democratic itself. The Baltic states also feel nervous, as if Poland were to be captured, they would be cut off from Europe, and once more forced into the Russian sphere. So the Baltic states come to Russia's defense, at least in terms of asking Poland to drop the matter of Ukraine. Poland drops it, and Kiev falls. Negotiations happen, and Europe agrees to allow Russia just everything east of the Dnieper River and north of the Pripyat River, if they are promised peace. Ukraine west of that will presumably stay independent, also being allowed to pursue a future with Europe in the European Union, because Ukrainians have wanted to do that, but Russia's kind of been halting them from that. Being a little scared, European federalists would rise greatly in popularity, even in Eastern Europe, which traditionally is more nationalist. I imagine Putin would also work hard to puppet Belarus. It wouldn't be as easy as just telling Lukashenko what to say, though. Lukashenko isn't that popular anymore. Belarus's people would prefer to be with Europe. Europe's last dictatorship would find itself more helpless with the risk from Russia and its supporters. Even Kazakhstan, I imagine, because Kazakhstan currently has a rough economic situation. So I could assume that Russia could try to puppet Kazakhstan or that kind of thing. They have like a very, instead of a more broad spear, their spear would be more controlled. Anyway, going back to the US, Trump would continue his rule past the inauguration date. During the martial law, he would get his election recount. And of course, Trump would claim to have won. However, that would have happened through the intentional removal of minority voters from voting systems. The US has already been doing this for a while. Controversy would rise, of course, and protests, but Trumpists would work hard to maintain control. By February, Myanmar's military would coup the government, just as in our timeline, but it would get far less attention as more of the world is more concerned with the world's most, or formerly most, powerful country. In our timeline, I watched the Myanmar coup more carefully than most people did. I did so through the internet. So, when I heard of the internet blackouts there, I was concerned for the people. A person from Myanmar posted on the r/Gen Z subreddit. This post detailed a list they were sent, a list of people and groups the military was looking to suppress. On that list was literally Gen Z. No, I'm not sure if it's part of some misunderstanding of online activism, or quite literally contempt the military had for young people opposing military rule. But this made me sick to my stomach. A state actively persecuting its youth. It sounds ridiculous, but even in our USA, we're not that far from that. Oftentimes, I will hear Trumpist circles discussing how they hate Gen Zers for a lot of things. One is their sensitivity, another is the fact that they trust scientists that say such things as climate change is real and vaccines work. They claim that Gen Z are lazy and want to be given handouts for things such as desiring student debt to be cancelled, as well as wanting universal health care, like every other developed country. Finally, over the fact that Gen Z are increasingly becoming LGBT, the disdain over the climate crisis alone shows that there is an active opposition to youth by conservatives. This would only be amplified in a alternate timeline. Now it's February the 6th, 1 month after the Capitol insurrection of January the 6th. More things have happened since then. Obviously, after getting their headquarters destroyed by a Trumpist American, and with America remaining Trumpist past the intended inauguration of Biden, the UN decides, you know what? America is just not safe. And they move their headquarters to Geneva, the Palais des Nations, or something like that. Countless protests have happened across America to varying levels of resistance. This scenario is already pretty crazy and difficult to track, so I'll leave it on a cliffhanger. You know, this scenario was originally far crazier. Like, I mean batshit. How crazy? Well, enough that South Carolina managed to start World War IV. Yeah, that's right, World War IV. And who started World War III? Ethiopia. Besides that, Trump had ordered the nuclear bombing of American cities. Marjorie Taylor Greene had become president of a Trumpist America, which broke away from the USA, and even committing what Greta Thunberg and people like her would call quite possibly the stupidest genocide ever, or a genocide of the youth of Gen Z. So a little less on a realistic side. That scenario, though, that version of this scenario, I decided to scrap in favor of realism. I also thought that scenario was showing a little more of my leftist bias. However, if y'all want to see it, I can revive it and show it to y'all. But only if this video hits 1,000 likes, which, given that I haven't even hit 100 subscribers yet, is a bit of a stretch. As unrealistic as that scenario is. Unless y'all want me to make that 1,000 like goal real. If you're going to be on the lookout for more from me, you may as well subscribe too. Be safe, y'all.